Hello, welcome to Homeschool Life. My name is Bobby, and in this video we are going to be discussing accounting payments. To begin, we need to log into your admin website, and from the home page we can access accounting in one of two ways, by clicking here or here. Of course, once we access accounting, we will be on the accounts receivable listing. There are two ways that payments are posted on your website. The first way is automated if you are using PayPal or paperless for your payments. This is set up through accounting settings, which you can access here. And once in accounting settings, this is the area where you can set up those links to PayPal. In the case of this group, they have two of their accounts that are linked to PayPal, this general account and the teacher account for Melissa Walters. You can see that the other accounts here for teachers do not have links to PayPal because those areas are blank. I won't go into how you set those up in this video. If you are interested in that, this is covered in the accounting settings video, which is in your help center. I'm going to return now to the accounts receivable listing. The other way that payments can be posted in your system is manually by an admin. And those, of course, would be cash or check payments. So let's get started and take a look at how the PayPal or paperless automated payments are recorded. The first thing you need to understand is that invoices are created using the account linked to PayPal. We're going to take a look at PayPal because that's what this group uses. When an invoice is created and is linked to PayPal, and that of course would be done either through an automated creation of an invoice in maybe class registration or through the calendar, or when creating manual invoices, there is an area where the account is selected. So in this case, if you'll recall, the general account was linked to a PayPal account. So if I selected general when I create this invoice, it will then be linked to PayPal when the member tries to make a payment. So let's pop over to the family side so that you can see what your families are going to be looking at when they are going to make a payment that will be automated. So I am logged in here as a family of the Gordon family, and I am on their statement of account. And you can see here that for the invoices that are linked to PayPal, for example, this invoice here, there is a box that I can check that says pay. When you check that box, the PayPal link here lights up, and that means if they were to go ahead and execute this payment, it would go through PayPal. But notice for this invoice down here, for the account of Dawn Hansen, there was no PayPal link for that particular teacher, so there is no option over here to pay. Once a family does execute a payment that goes through PayPal, that payment is recorded automatically by the system on both the family side and on the admin side. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like on the family side. So I click on the invoice and payment details, which shows me a complete listing from the family side of all of the invoices, payments, and adjustments that have been made. So notice we have a few payments here that have been paid through PayPal, and those post on the family side with the payment information, the account that it was linked to, the date of the payment, a description, of course the type is PayPal, a transaction ID, and the amount. Now it looks just a little bit different on the admin side. If we take a look at that same member account and we look at the payments that have been posted through PayPal on the admin side, there is one additional thing that is recorded, and that is if the payment is in a full payment accounting category, there is an invoice icon associated with the payment. This record here is a perfect example of that. This record shows an invoice icon in this column, which means that this is the full payment accounting category, and this is the invoice, or sometimes there's more than one invoice that are linked to this particular payment. You can at any time click on the invoice icon of any payment record, and the system will show you what invoice or invoices were paid with that payment. Returning back to that family invoice and payment detail. Now notice for this particular payment here, this is in a partial payment accounting category, class registration, and there is no invoice icon. That's because in partial payment categories, the payments do not apply to specific invoices, but instead apply to the overall balance of all of the invoices in that category. And that's why you'll always have CR balance payment here if those payments are made through PayPal. And you will not have an invoice icon. If you really don't have a good understanding of the difference between full payment and partial payment accounting categories, I would highly recommend that you watch the accounting introduction video found in your Help Center, which goes into great detail about the difference between those two payment pools. Also notice that in full payment accounting categories, if a payment is made to a specific invoice, the paid status will change to yes. So here's an example of that. Payment was made, the invoice status is now paid equals yes. But for the invoices where there haven't been payments yet, paid status is still no. Now you may be looking at this record saying, why is this invoice show an NA in the paid status column? Well, the reason for that is because this is an invoice in a partial payment accounting category. Again, as I mentioned earlier, in partial payment accounting categories, payments do not apply to specific invoices. They apply to the overall balance of all the invoices in the category, and that's why you can make partial payments. So the NA is not applicable, and that means that because payments are not made toward specific invoices, that paid status is not applicable for partial payment invoices. So let's take a look now at how to post payments manually. This must be done by an admin user from the admin side. Payments are posted using the Add a Payment icon located here at the top of the Family Invoice and Payment Detail. This payment icon is also located at the top of the Accounts Receivable listing and the payment listing. So you can make manual payments from one of three areas. I actually like doing it from the Invoice and Payment Detail because I like to take a look at the account itself and see what's going on with it before I start posting payments. So when you get ready to post a payment, you click on the icon. If you're starting from the Family Invoice and Payment Detail, the family will already be selected. If you start the payment process from the Accounts Receivable listing or the Payments listing, you'll have to pick your family from this drop-down. But since we started from the Family's account, it's already showing the Barbara Gordon family. Now, if you're making a payment in a partial payment category like CR, you'll notice that there is an area here where you can actually enter the amount of the payment. Notice that it's not showing me specific invoices in the CR category. It's showing me the total balance. So if I want to make a payment, I can say I want to make a $50 payment. Toward that $200 balance, I would key in the 50. You can key in any amount that you want to there. Now in full payment accounting categories, which would be the rest of these, notice that there is a place where you can select the invoice by clicking in the box. And if I check a box, that amount is going to be paid on that invoice. You'll notice that on these types of categories, I'm going to take away this one here so you can see what happens on these full payment invoices. If I refresh my screen now, you'll see that if I click on this invoice here, notice the amount changes to $25. I can't actually change that amount because I am paying a full payment invoice, which means I have to pay $25. If I click on this $5 invoice, my amount down here changes to $30. If I want to pay all these invoices, I can click on Pay All. Now notice it includes my full balance here on my CR total balance. So you have to be really careful when you use that Pay All icon. So once you have decided which of your invoices you're going to pay, or if you're going to pay for this a payment toward this balance here, and I'm going to go ahead and put that back in $50 here. Say I'm just going to make a $50 balance payment. I would go ahead and fill in the rest of the payment information, the date. I can change it if I received this earlier and I want to backdate it, or I can leave it today's date. I can put in a description, and in this case, I might say CR balance payment. I would select the type of payment. It's a check payment, we'll say, and I can put in my check number. We'll say the check number is 8965. The amount is $50. It matches up to what I keyed here. And then I have an option here of emailing the family a copy of this payment by clicking on yes. Notice when I do that, an additional email address comes up here to copy on the payment email. That is your admin. If you don't want that to be sent, just highlight it and delete it. I'm going to click on no here. Don't need to email the family. And then I'm going to save the payment. So I created a payment for the Gordon family, and you'll notice when I come back to my invoice the payment detail, here is that payment that I just created. Notice that is not linked to an invoice because I made the payment toward the CR balance, which are not linked to specific invoices. There is one more type of payment entry that I'd like to show you, and that is called a batch input. This is really helpful if you have a whole stack of checks from a group of families and you want to enter them one right after the other. This can be a real time saver. The way that you use this feature is to use the Add Payment icon. You select your family. In this case, the Gordon family is displayed, so I'm going to leave that. And then you take a look at the check from the Gordon family and select the appropriate invoices, or enter, if it's a CR balance payment, enter that here. Let's say that they're making a payment of $75 toward their CR balance. You would key in the appropriate payment information. I'll leave the date as today's date, so you could change that if you needed to. I'm going to select my type as a check and put in the number of the check. And I can email the family or not. In this case, I'm not going to. Now, instead of choosing the Save Payment option, when you're finished with this particular check, you would say Save and Add to Batch Input instead. So when I select that option, I am told that the payment has been successfully created. I click on OK. Now notice that here on the top right-hand corner of your screen, there is the beginning of a list of checks that I am paying. I'm ready to take my second check now. So I'm going to select the family for which this applies. Let's say this is a check from the Larson family. I choose the family. A list of all of their open invoices comes up. If they sent me a check for $100 and it is going to be to pay this chemistry #1 invoice, I would select that invoice. I would change the date if necessary. Now notice the description is the same as the previous payment that I made. If it is the same description, I can leave it. Or if it's not the same, I can change it. Class registration payment. The type is a check. I would simply need to put in the correct check number. The amount is already there for me. And again, I can email the family or not. And I have another check to key. So I'm going to save and add to my batch input. Notice now that both of the checks that I've keyed are showing. Now watch, your total here continues to increase each time that I add a new check. So what you can do is, if you have a total of all the checks in your stack, once you finish entering all of these checks, your total should balance. And that's kind of a way to determine if you've entered everything accurately. But let's enter one more this time. Let's enter something for the Simon family. Now let's say they want to pay all of their invoices, so they would have sent me a check for $50. I would just click on Pay All, and the date I will leave the same, and maybe I just need to change it to Class Registration Payments, and it's a check number, and I'm going to save this payment, add it to my batch input, and now I can check and see. Notice that each of those, because there were several different invoices involved, they're split out as separate invoices. But the batch total should be the same as what the checks that I have in my stack total. Once I've confirmed that indeed all of the checks that I have match, the totals match what's showing here, I can clear the batch because I'm done now. And I can return to my payments screen. When I do that, I can now see all of those checks that I just entered. So there's my CR balance payment, and then here are the payments that were made to the full payment invoices for the rest of those families. It's just a quick way to save some time if you're entering several checks at the same time. Now, one question that I often get asked is, what do I do if I have a family that needs to make a partial payment on a full payment invoice? Can this be done? Well, the system is not set up to do that, but there is a workaround that you can use if you absolutely need to. And this does need to be the exception rather than the rule, because there are a few steps involved. So what you can do is, let's return back to the accounts receivable listing. Let's find a family here for which we can do this. So let's look at the Jorgensen family. Let's say that they are past due on this invoice here. You can see that it's highlighted in red, and they've fallen on some hard times, and they need to make a partial payment toward that $100 invoice. Well, the way the system is set up, you cannot just enter a $75 payment toward that $100 invoice. But what you can do is you can split that $100 invoice into two invoices, one for $75 and a second for $25, so that you can then apply the payment of $75. So to do that, I'm going to actually edit the invoice that is currently there. I'm going to change it from $100 to $75. As long as an invoice in a full payment category is not paid, you can edit the invoice. So I'm going to click on the invoice number. The only thing I want to change here is the amount of the invoice. And what I might also do is I might make a note on the description that this is invoice 1 of 2. I'm going to make a mental note of the date of the invoice, 8/21/20, and the due date of the invoice, 1/8 of 21. And also, it's important that you pay attention to which account and which category this invoice is in, so that you can create the second invoice with the exact same category and account. So that is the Larson account. Once I'm finished updating the invoice, I say update the invoice here. So now I have changed the invoice amount from $100 to $75. What I need to do now is I need to add a second invoice, and I'm going to actually highlight my description here, and I'm going to copy it so that when I create my second invoice, it's going to have the exact same description. I'm going to add a new invoice. The category was CRRP. The account was the Mindy Larson account. Now I can change the date to the date of that original invoice, which was 8/21 of 20. Back to August here. And choose it. Now you can also use the original due date, which was 1/8 of 21, or maybe you've worked it out with them and they have indicated that they can pay this off by the end of February. So maybe you put a new due date in there. I'm going to paste in my description, which matches the first invoice, but instead of invoice 1 of 2, I'm going to make this invoice 2 of 2, because it is the second of the invoices. And remember, the first one was $75, so this one needs to be $25. Once I'm done with that, I save the invoice. So now what you can see is that here's the original invoice changed to $75, and then here's the new invoice, which we created for $25. So now you can go in and you can apply your $75 partial payment to that invoice. So I would pick that invoice and I would say whatever description I want to use here. I would say maybe a class registration. It'd be done by check. Key in whatever the transaction ID is. And then I would save it. And notice the amount is $75, which is the amount of the check that they sent you. So this is the this is the new invoice that we just created. It's still open for $25. So what you've effectively done is you have applied that $75 payment to the first of the two invoices, and then you've left open the payment still due on them for $25. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't recommend doing this often because it is involved, but when it's absolutely necessary to apply a smaller payment to a full payment invoice, this can be done. The other thing that I want to point out is that when you're entering payments from your members where you have a partial payment invoice balance as well as a group of full payment invoices, you have to make sure that you properly apply the payments. Let's take a look at a family so that I can show you this. And I want to look at the Jorgensen family. I think there might be one in here. We can try this. Let's see if they have an outstanding balance. They do. They have both an outstanding CR balance, and they also have an open invoice. So this will be perfect. Okay, so I want to add a payment. So let's say they have a balance on their account, as you can see here, of $230, which is comprised of a $200 CR balance, as well as a $5 and a $25 invoice, total of $230. So let's say that they sent you in a payment of $105, and they want to apply $100 of it to the CR balance and $5 of it toward this open invoice for their PE group dues. It's really important that you make sure that you key in the amount to be applied to the CR balance in the CR balance field, and that you highlight or check the box next to the invoice that you're paying in the full payment category. The reason for this is that if you were just to enter $105 here, what's going to happen is that there will be a $105 payment applied to the CR balance, but this invoice here will not be closed for payment. So later on down the road, they may say, I sent in a payment for that $5 PE group dues. Why isn't that showing up on my account? The reason it wouldn't show up, and I'll show you what happens here. If I just say here, payment for classes, and if I put in a check, and I save it, what you'll see now, if you go to the invoice and payment detail listing, is a $105 payment, which has all been applied to the CR balance. Even though they intended for it to be applied to this PE group dues invoice, it did not apply because we did not key it correctly. So you always want to make sure that you apply what's supposedly going to the CR balance or to your partial payment invoice balances, and then you want to make sure that you apply the payments correctly to the full payment invoices. If we look at that one more time, let's say this time that they send in their new balance now is $125, but let's say they send in a check for $125. You cannot just come in here and key in $125. Well, I'll show you what happens if you do that. Okay, so they've sent in 125, which should cover everything because that's what the balance is on their account. But if you key that in as a $125 payment, and you save the payment. When you go back out and you look at their account, it shows a zero balance on their account. However, you will notice that there are still invoices that are not paid. Here's one. Here's another one. The reason for that is because we applied the entire payment to the CR balance, and we did not select those open invoices when we made the payment. So that would be very confusing because your member would go in and they would look at their balance and it would show as zero, yet they would still have these unpaid invoices on their account. That's what would happen if you incorrectly allocated the payment, all of it toward the CR balance, when indeed there should have been some of that applied to those open invoices. So I'm going to delete that payment, and I'll show you the way that it should have been done so that you can see the difference. Okay, so what should have happened was they sent in a $125 payment. We key in the $95 to close out the CR balance, and then we choose the other open invoices. We can do it that way, or you can just click on Pay All, which would do the same thing. Now notice the full payment of $125, but this time it's going to close those open invoices. And again, I'm going to always have to select the type and put in the number and save it. Now this time what happens is, now their balance is zero, but all of their payment statuses on these invoices is showing yes, because we properly allocated the payment to not only the CR balance, as indicated here, but also to these invoices for PE and this invoice here for class registration. If you have additional questions about any other area of the accounting tool or any other topic, please feel free to visit the Help Center from your admin homepage, where we have a variety of topics and many videos that you can watch. The other thing that you can always do is to go to your technical support area from the homepage and create a ticket. This concludes the video on accounting payments. Thank you for watching.